Greetings, students. Today we're here with Christopher C. Brown, and Christopher is an associate professor and reference librarian at Denver University. And before I mess up any more of his introduction, you may know him because he has authored two of the books we're using in our course, Harnessing the Power of Google, and I have that digitally, so I can't lift it up, but also Librarian's Guide to Online Searching. And this is an edition, is it fourth or fifth? Fifth. It's the fifth
That's
edition.
the fifth.
Okay. And so I'm going to have Christopher fill in the blanks in terms of what I didn't put in his introduction. Can I call you Chris?
Chris, yes, that's what I prefer. Christopher's just my bibliographic identity. You know, we have to have that.
Gotcha. And that's something we learned about a little bit earlier in the course as well. So tell us a little bit about your work.
Sure. Well, I'm a reference librarian at heart and by passion. And I've been doing this for about 30 some odd years. I started at Cornell University, not as a professional librarian, but as a parapro. And I was working in circulation access services, they called it. And then I was working for 9 years in reference. And that's where I really learned reference librarianship. And then I moved to Denver and got the degree, but I have to say that the degree just kind of reinforced what I'd already learned in many ways at Cornell University, being such a challenging and in-depth environment. And so I've been teaching in the University of Denver Library School for over 20 years. And these books really come out of that teaching. You know, if you ever have writer's block, just teach for a while. And then the way I write is I just pretend like I'm teaching. I just write and then fix it up later. So, actually, my real day job is at the University of Denver, where I am actually a full professor at the university libraries there. And I'm an affiliate professor at the University of Denver Library School program, which is under the Department of Education. And so after writing a number of the requisite, peer-reviewed articles and things over the years, it just, an opportunity came to write a book. And I met with some folks that had experience doing that and got some ins and some connections. And that's where Harnessing the Power of Google came from. And this all grew out of a course that I taught in the late 90s called Internet Reference and Research, which we no longer offer. It's kind of been embedded into other searching classes. But that Internet Reference and Research was actually pre-Google. It was when things like Find the Web, Fast, and Northern Light and other things were around. And but then Google came along. And I noticed that Google really understood something. You know what they understood? They understood that librarians are information freaks. We are control freaks. We like to control things. And that's where Google Scholar and Google Books came from. So Google Scholar, because publishers and librarians like to control information, whereas the web is out of control, right? There is very little usable metadata in Google. There's metadata, but it's not controlled. Whereas information from publishers, that is Google Scholar, is very much controlled. And information from Google Books comes from places like OCLC. Right. And other places where the metadata comes from. So Google understood that, and other places like Microsoft didn't understand that. And so that's why I focused the book on Google. I know that I use Bing and I use other things as well. Microsoft once had a project, Microsoft Books, which was actually superior scans. It's kind of like the VHS Betamax thing. Betamax was better than VHS, but Betamax died and VHS continues. So, I mean, the Microsoft book scans were superior to Google book scans, but Microsoft didn't continue with the project. And so all the universities that had scanned their books, they lost out. And Google Books, for good or for ill, it continues. So the reason is get these three Googles that I call it, that work together: Google Books, Google Web, Google Scholar. And for the academic anyway, that's a win. And then the online searching book, they like the Google Harnessing book. So they asked me to update Suzanne Bell's book. She was retiring. Mm-hmm. Actually, she's younger than I am, but she retired. And so I updated that. And in fact, I'm submitting the 6th edition manuscript at the end of this week.
Okay, so this is important. I want some scoops on the 6th edition. So what did you decide was missing in the 5th edition that you're adding to the 6th?
Sure. Well, in addition to the perfunctory updates, I took every search example and updated the vendor results just kind of to show how vendor content increases. But I think the most significant change in databases is newspaper indexing. So I don't know if you've done a search in either a ProQuest or a Newsbank newspaper index, but there's a significant difference. And that is, I could demo it live, I suppose.
Sure.
But let me get to the right page here. Might be.
So the thing I think about is, with newspapers, no one submits metadata along with an article for a newspaper piece, right? Not in the same way they would for an academic journal.
That's exactly it. So I'm going to search a resource that I know will demonstrate what I'm trying to say, but I could also do it for the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. All right.
Okay, so we're looking at the Denver Post through Newsbank.
That's right. So in Denver, the main little shopping area in downtown Denver is the 16th Street Mall. It's been around for several decades. And so we should see resources over time. So 16th Street Mall. So what do you notice? I shouldn't ask you, I should ask your students. What do you notice immediately about the metadata and the display on this page? Well, it differs. So the first one, we see the title of the publication, Denver Post, and we see a page number, and we see a keyword in context, okay? The second, and I mouse over it so I get the full. The second one, we see full metadata. We see a title, a date, we see a byline. The third one, we see a title metadata, a date, and a byline, and a page number. And I guess I only see metadata following down. Oh, here we go. Down here. Here we see a title and we see a byline. Here we see just the title of the publication, Denver Post, just a date and keyword in context, no byline at all.
And it's the same publication.
Yeah, what the heck is going on here? Well, what's going on is you got two standards mixed together in a single database. Here's what's going on. As you know, let me start with the bigger picture. Books are big things, right? So much we care about books that we do author authority control on the authors. We use the Library of Congress name authority file, right? And if there is no name, the Library of Congress creates a name. They try to find birth dates and hopefully not death dates. And we create that. With with magazine articles, such as peer-reviewed journals, we don't bother creating name authorities, right? Because it's too difficult. But we do have metadata. Now with newspaper articles, they're so prolific, published so many times that it's getting over the top for newspaper indexers like a ProQuest or a Newsbank to keep up with that. So what they're doing instead is they're turning to automation. There is no metadata created here. They are just doing OCR only. No metadata.
Recognition.
Right, optical character recognition. So here we have something from 2016, at which time they were creating full metadata. But here, 2019, they are no longer doing that. So this is perhaps the biggest change in the book. There are other things too, like whole databases that have disappeared.
One thing you mentioned in the 5th edition, and Karen Markey, by the way, also mentions it. You're both wondering about, will databases continue? And
yes,
will reference librarians continue? But, what's your take on that right now?
I'll answer that, but before I do, before I go into that, I just wanted to call attention to the source page here from the Denver Post Historical Archives. Notice that the format varies. Image text. They're telling you in their own code words, metadata, metadata, no metadata, no metadata. You see that?
Yeah.
Image. So that's what's going on. Even in their retrospective, we at the University of Denver have been crying for years for one of these two publishers to give us the Denver Post. For some reason, Denver's not as important as New York and Chicago. So anyway, we've never had a digital copy of the Denver Post before, going back to the beginning. And so they did it for us, but with no metadata. So I just wanted to.
No, it's hard. I had to search for an obituary for my grandmother who passed many years ago. And it was in a local newspaper that had no metadata and was impossible to search by keywords. And it was just by going back and finding the date of the obituary and going through the entire paper that I was able, or the obituary section, that I was able to find it. So the newspaper searching is a challenge.
It is very much a challenge. And you have to think in terms of, what are you searching? Are you searching metadata, in which case you have to think like an indexer?
Right.
Are you searching a full text optical character recognition OCR scans, in which case you have to think like a full text? How is a journalist going to express it? If we were searching metadata, we would pluralize the noun obituary, would be obituaries, because that would be how it would come. But if you're thinking like a newspaper, they're not going to think like an indexer, they're going to say obituary.
And to confound this even further, newspaper title writers don't necessarily want you to know exactly what the article's about.
No, that's right. That's right.
They want you to be intrigued into reading it.
And if you have no metadata at all, no OCR on your text, you have to think in terms of the only thing you have, and that is dates. And you have to actually do virtual flipping of the pages, of a broadsheet.
Because of the absence for so long, this is a very important resource for the folks in Denver.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So you were asking about the future of librarianship and reference librarianship in particular?
Yeah, this is probably going to be in the final week of our course, and one of the things we're reflecting on is the value of what we've learned, and what trends should we be looking out for, and for a variety of reasons, and among them heavy Google use and limited funding and exploitive costs. We're wondering about the future of databases.
Yeah, and vendors are wondering as well. They're coming out with more and more data, and it seems like vendors are tripping over each other for more and more primary sources. So it seems like vendors are distinguishing themselves by primary source materials. Gale, for example, Arabic language books. Well, I don't speak Arabic, and there's only very few people who in this continent do, but that's what actually we've subscribed to that for the very few people that could use it. We have Chinese periodicals, which obviously the most spoken language in the world is Chinese, but not necessarily in Denver. but that's considered like a primary source in a way for people who are doing research in Chinese academic literature. So I think databases are trying to get more and more distinctive, and whether libraries will pay the price remains to be seen. But vendors have done a pretty good job of turning the print indexes, legacy print indexes, into databases. There's only a few that probably remain that haven't been done. And to the extent that users, librarians, but especially users, are perplexed with any database that doesn't have full text, right? So they say, where's the full text? Whereas 20 years ago, this was, to even have a database online at all, Silver Platter, or all these online things that we no longer know the names of, were big things back then, because wow, we don't have to use a print index anymore. Well, now those days have so changed that students don't even appreciate, in fact, library school students don't even appreciate what we've been through and what we're experiencing now. So probably,
in fact, in our first module, I have links to some of the old favorites that we started with, Reader's Guide and Science Citation Index, and artifacts like call slips, which I don't know if I've seen.
Well, in the old days, it was economy of space, right? We had to have an index that was replete with abbreviations because you couldn't afford to put out these huge, thick print volumes all the time. So even things like Reader's Guide or biological abstracts or these things took up a zip code of space.
Yes.
And now they're in online databases. We don't care how many descriptors we add. We don't care how long the abstracts are because we don't have to put them out in print. We just have to make them available in a database. And so what I call the information access anomaly, which is what is the relationship of a surrogate record to the searchability factor, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why books are almost invisible these days in library catalogs. So think about I always take my students through this thought process. Some students actually remember the card catalogs.
Yes.
And how did people access information in card catalog days? Through a left-anchored search. Left-anchored meaning an inverted name, Brown, Christopher C.
Right.
Valenza, Joyce.
Yes.
Whatever. And titles, you will omit the initial article in whatever language you're in. And subjects, because you didn't want to have to file too many sets of cards. So one book, you might have to file 16 physical cards in different parts of this expansive card catalog. Well, when the online catalog came around in the late 80s, 90s, it was a revolution because now we could search left-anchoredly, if I can make up a word.
Yes.
But we could also search by keyword, and this was a total revolution. Wow, search by keyword. Well, then that starts to not be so great anymore because, okay, search by keyword. But where's the full text? Well, you go to the shelf and you pull it off the shelf.
Right.
Well, then Google Books comes along and starts scanning books. Now we have some books online. You can't necessarily view the book online, but you can at least find the words that are close to each other online and know that book, though you can't view all of it or even any of it, at least that's the book I want because it mentions a name that can't be found anywhere else or an event that really I need to see. So even though the fulfillment aspect isn't there, in other words, getting the thing, at least you've discovered it. So here's the thing. That element, the online catalog, that was the revolutionary factor in the 1980s, 1990s, is now the weakest tool in our toolbox. What was once the strongest tool in our toolbox is now the weakest tool, the library catalog. And so what I often do with students looking for things, because how many times have students come to the reference desk and says, your library doesn't have any books on my topic? Oh. Actually, we do. But because the Library of Congress and subject headings, rule of 3 or whatever, or that's what it used to be, or assigning 5 or 6 subject headings, that's all we get. But probably your topic might be in a buried chapter of a book, and only Google Books will turn that up, or another full text search feature. So all that is to say that with Google Books, Google Scholar, Google Web, you get a 1-to-1 surrogate record to full text ratio. Whereas with a catalog, you might get 1 to 10,000.
So it's interesting because you could actually have your users, your patrons, your students, begin their catalog or OPAC search in Google Books, then use WorldCat to see where the books are and hopefully
that's what I often do. I'm a renegade around here. I often don't start with our own library resources. I often start with Google Books and find what's out there, then go to the library catalog to see if a local library near us, hopefully ours, has it. And if they're doing academic topics, that often works.
Yeah, I never did answer the question about whether databases are going to live or die. But that's okay. This has been a fun journey.
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I've never been in the vendor world. Yeah. I do know that vendors need to keep going, and I don't necessarily like the trend of vendors buying up each other, but so it seems like the more vendors buy other vendors, the weaker the product becomes because they tend to be diffuse. They tend to spend less time developing the product. So that's a concerning thing.
Yeah, and you lose some of the character that the original database had. So I remember, I remember losing things in a number of the databases that I admired.
Yes.
For instance, ProQuest Historical Newspapers, it's still with the same company, but they've lost the illustrated interface that I found so valuable.
Exactly. And my sociology colleagues, librarian colleagues, tell me that sociological abstracts under ProQuest has lost a lot of its, I'm not sure if the descriptors or some of the indexing features have been lost.
I think we see that a lot with EBSCO because EBSCO kind of unifies everything under that very Spartan.
Well, and I'll pick on EBSCO a little bit too. All of them, all of the aggravators, as I call them.
That's great.
They do what I call in the book back-generated indexing, which means they take the records that are from many, many disparate sources, and they do a giant sucking sound that pulls all the subject descriptors out, and they try to merge and dedupe those. And it kind of works. You got to give them credit. It's a creative process. But if you ever looked at the indexes, in an EBSCO database?
I have not.
Mind if I share again?
Yeah. While you're doing that, is this to facilitate discovery search?
Well, they do it to facilitate discovery and to give a semblance of that they're controlling things, whereas they're actually not controlling things. So I'll just go into business source complete as an example. So if I go to the indexes, and you can select an index. So let's do, see, they changed it since the last time I was here. We'll do headings. We'll just browse for the letter G. Okay. Now, do you think that these are the same thing? How many of these are the same? They're probably a lot of them the same.
Yeah.
These are different. Notice they have ones. These are different because no humans have intervened here. Let's just do a search for something else. Let's see. I'm doing things. I just don't think that they've done real.
So those are that, and that's a heading search.
It is.
But I wonder if you went with something that's much more defined, like, is it the code, the industry codes? That's a format that wouldn't be necessarily messed with, right?
No, because that would be sucked in through a NAICS code thing,
so
right?
We're not seeing thesaurus or control vocabulary here when we're seeing headings.
No. Notice this author, whom I don't know. I suspect that these two are the same.
Yeah.
And so this is a result of that backward. Yeah. No animals were harmed. No people were involved. It's just a sucking of the descriptors from the data. It's very ingenious, and very few people are going to care, but we need to care as information professionals that what's happening here. So, and I don't blame them so much because nobody can possibly take all newspaper or magazine, trade journal articles and be expected to dote over them like we would over a book.
Yeah.
But we have to be aware that this is going on. Is this the same Brown? We don't know. Here's the thing. We like to think that subject headings are godlike. We like to think that there's an authority there because we call them authority files, right? But the subject headings are only as authoritative as the person who assigns them. And subject headings have not just specificity, but they have a telescoping degree. So is the indexer assigning the most specific heading, or are they going out of branch? And how are they doing that? And so the only other thing that we're left if we don't have subject headings is keyword searches. Well, what are databases known for not doing? That's relevance ranking, right? They're not particularly good at relevance ranking. So you need two things. We need keyword searching. You need deep searching of a full text corpus, and you need relevance ranking. So who is good at that? Google. And even though we don't like to tip our hat to Google, let's face it, they're the billionaires and we're not. And they've got something that they've figured out. So I like to combine the two. I don't like to throw out subject headings. So I like to do a both and approach. So I like to do a search in Google Scholar, and I like to do a search in the database of record. So, medical librarians will argue with me that the mesh subject headings are good, and they're assigned by authorities. They're assigned by people who have standing to assign, just like LexisNexis, Westlaw. Those indexers have cred in order to assign the subject headings, whereas somebody in a general indexing house might not. But nevertheless, I think it's a both and thing. We can maximize the power of subject headingness and the power of keyword relevanceness.
And then there's so many things we could also play with. We can play with where they exist in fields and using descriptors, which are kind of in the middle of that whole thing. So there's
right.
lots of ways to play with that stuff. But it's important, I think, that we're aware of these differences among our databases and among the ways that they treat different types of content. So and I hadn't really thought much about that before. So this has been a great example. The folks in my class are pre-service professionals generally. You and I have been in practice for a long time, and they've gotten the benefit of my wisdom of experience. But what are the messages that you would send? Many of these people will be not at your reference desk, but at a reference desk like yours someday. Or they'll be teaching in schools, perhaps like you are. If you can kind of hone down your best advice for these new information professionals, what are some of the things they should be thinking about as they enter practice?
I think that try to understand what's being asked of you and try to think broadly about the question. So I teach a reference class too. And what I have my students do is I give them actual reference questions that have been asked at our university reference desk. And I ask them to answer them. But I have one rule. I said, you have to provide 3 strategies to answer this question. Because here's what I find that I do is librarians tend to take I live in the mountain area, not on the mountains, but water takes the quickest path down a mountain, right? And the path of least resistance. And what we tend to do, the trap we tend to fall into as reference librarians is we'll give the answer that we're comfortable with. Maybe we're comfortable with EBSCO's Academic Search Complete or ProQuest Central or whatever database. And so we'll say, we'll just go there and there's a bunch of, I found 33,000 articles, there you go. Well, okay, but let's try to hone the search down in terms of descriptors or keywords or field searching. But let's try a different strategy. Does this question, are there statistics involved? Can we go to a database like maybe a government database? Of course, government is my area. Can we go to Statista or another database? Is there a statistical compendium on the topic? How about an encyclopedia? We teach reference and we teach database searching as 2 separate classes. But think about it. Almost every tool that we go to in reference is a database. So these 2 courses, these 2 things have merged together. So I actually use my own book in my reference class as well, because most of reference is going to be accessing an online database. I love the day though when I have to actually go to a physical book. Well, that was when I used to go to a library. It's been 6 months since I've set foot in my own office. So
yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of going into a lot of directions, but I try to get them to think in three different strategies, not just the same strategy. Here's EBSCO's Academic Search Complete, here's ProQuest Central, here's Gale's Academic One File. No, try to think in different kinds of information.
That's a really great idea. I love it because one of the things I find really fascinating is for one of our activities, we use some of Dan Russell's prompts. And the students are often worried that they did find the answer, and sometimes it's not an answer, but ideas that would help with a research project or something. But they worry if they did it right. And I think just like solving a theorem, figuring out a response to a theorem in geometry, there are multiple ways that you could prove things. And I love the idea of forcing them to do it and then say, aha, but here's another way I might have done it. And
right.
Yeah. And often I think that it's where you start in Google that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And sometimes imagining, for instance, in Google Books, imagining what type of source would be the source in which you would find this in a print environment. Is a
Yeah,
field
that's
net.
where
Yeah.
the three Googles comes in handy to try to stretch things. Well, I never would have thought of that,
All right. So,
type
okay.
of
So
thing.
imagining, that's a great one. I love this one. What other advice might you give for these new professionals? So one of the things I'm thinking about, Chris, is this notion of stage fright. The first time you're at a reference desk and everybody's going to you for help and advice, and you're terrified.
Well,
Yeah, how
well,
do you consider
the
that? Sorry.
first thing I'll say about that is in an academic, so it depends on an academic or a public, because I'm used to addressing students that will go both ways. So
Yeah, either way.
in an questions tend to repeat. So what I encourage students to do is I can't necessarily address the first time you have stage fright, but I can address how to prepare for it. So what I try to encourage students to do is wrestle with a reference resource. So when I was first at Cornell at the reference desk working nights back in the 80s, I would see 80,000 books, and a lot of these books, I had no idea what they were here for. So I started to think to myself, why in the world would a reference librarian choose to put this volume or this set of books in reference? So I would take it upon myself when it wasn't busy to take a volume of that book and wrestle with it until it was my own. I'm not stealing the book. I mean, make it my own intellectually. So there was a particular example of this German book, and it was IBZ. It was a book review index, or IBR. And the Germans are very fastidious indexes. They're very good. But I had no idea what would be the day where I would touch this book in answer to a reference question. And so I wrestled with it. I don't speak any German, but I tried to figure it out, and I asked a few questions. And I finally, after many weeks, I made that set mine. So I understood when I would go to that set. We can do the same thing with databases. So my field is not music, it's government information. My field is not chemistry, but I've spent many hours going to like SciFinder, call it SciFinder N. And I would wrestle with it and say, how am I going to help somebody with this database? I'm not a chemist. I don't understand how to even frame a question in here, but I would wrestle with it. I would read help pages. There's lots of libguides. You can do cite:/edu, SciFinder help. You can read other librarians who do know these things and find out what they know about it. So I try to wrestle with databases until I make it my own.
I love that. I do that too. And I think that's one of the geeky things we do. And we do a lot of individual database exploration. We have a database of the week and some other activities like that. I do also want to emphasize or amplify your idea of LibGuides, the LibGuides community as a support for any area where I feel like I don't have strong content knowledge. If I get a question in that area, I know there's an expert reference librarian in that content area who's created guides before me.
Yes, absolutely. LibGuides are ubiquitous. SpringShare has a corner on the market, but there are other things out there as well. Mm-hmm. So I often like to do cite:/edu and library guide, and then my topic, or LibGuide and the topic. And actually, I have all of my students create LibGuides in several of the classes I teach, so
we
they
do
can get
too.
experience.
So I'm glad you're saying that, so that my students don't think I'm the only one who's doing that.
Well, for one thing, it's something they can put on their resume that they have a skill in, because almost any place you apply for a reference or database position, you're going to need to be able to do that. So, have that under your belt. And and then the community, you can tap into the LibGuides, community, and get tremendous help from people who've been down the path before.
We haven't covered a lot of government documents. If you could, and not every student, start from the beginning of this question. Chris, we haven't touched a lot about government documents in this course, and I know that is an area of your expertise. Students could take an elective in this, which comes around occasionally, but without getting too deep, if a student is faced with the need to dig into government documents for questions, what are maybe the top things they need to know about? Or are there go-to sources that are more general that students are likely to have access to?
Well, I just wrote this.
I was hoping you'd show that. So, what are you most excited about relating to your new book, Mastering United States Government Information?
Well, it's been really accepted by the community, which is good. It's on the Federal Depository Library website. They're featuring it prominently. But I teach the class. I used to teach it every year. Just that's what where the book comes out of. But government information is basically in several categories. There's general government information, just knowing that it's there, how to navigate the government, how to navigate the complexities of the government. But at least in an academic setting, many of the questions are related to legislation or statistics. Those are the biggest areas that students and the public have. So legislation, it might be in terms of bill tracking. It might be in terms of past, current laws, or legislative history. Often people in education, social work, even sciences are trying to track the history of NASA funding, the history of education programs, the history of something, and knowing how to do legislative history. So this is the first book that actually covers how to do legislative history research in the context of all of government information. And then statistics. 4 out of 5 people want a statistic. I just made that number up, but that's the way people feel about statistics, right? It's just made up. But no, you can actually find authoritative statistics from government entities if you know how to search for it. And that search process entails who cares about this statistic. In other words, what government entity cares enough to publish statistics in these days on the web? And what tools can we use to find those statistics? And how about longitudinal statistics? What tools are available for statistics over time? Because that's a hard one. Even though the Bureau of Transportation Statistics may have stats, but how do we track things over time? And then of course we have 100 statistical agencies throughout the federal government, 13 primary statistical agencies. How do we tap into those? That's what I cover in the book. And then the Census Bureau, of course, census is on our minds because we're doing it not only as a decennial census year and reapportionment and all of that, but also generally for grant writing. Public libraries have to help people that are writing grants for various things. They need community stats. Academic people, we need statistics. Not only do we need statistics generally, we want individual statistics. So things like people that have a bachelor's degree, how many of them are this ethnicity or were born overseas or whatever. And that can't be done with a general census search. It has to be done with microstatistics. So, I mean, those are some of the things we touch on in the book.
Chris, with the emergence of things like Google data sets, are people missing something if they're not going to an individual agency or the source itself?
Yes, they are, because Google data sets is good, but it doesn't even, a government information librarian wouldn't even go there as a first resort at this point. It's more of a place for archiving data sets, but doesn't give any context, any interpretation to the data. It's a place where you can find data housed, but not data interpreted or understood.
Gotcha. And another question I had about this was, and I'm not a government docs librarian, so I feel really ignorant in this area. But one thing that surprises me is the commercialism of government data. And so I found as a high school librarian, for instance, that statistical abstracts or historical abstracts was a very expensive purchase. And it's now, and I would have expected some of this government data to be more freely available, but it doesn't seem to be. Is it packaged?
Well, no, it is freely available. So what it is, StatAb started in 1878 and it sunsetted in 2012. So the 2012 edition of Statistical Abstract was the last freely available edition. Well, thankfully, in a way, a vendor took it over. ProQuest took it over. So now you can buy Statistical Abstract in the United States, but it's also freely available on the census website from 1878, completely digitized, through 2012. But the subsequent volumes are no longer published by the federal government, although it has the same look and feel. One of the value-added aspects of StatAbs, even when it was under the Census Bureau, was that they incorporated private statistics in there. So if you wanted statistics on hospitals, the federal government doesn't collect that data. It comes from association data, but that would be incorporated into the government edition. Well, ProQuest has continued that for the most extent. There's a few of the things that they don't give to ProQuest. But so in a sense, the subscription to ProQuest, though it's unfortunate, is worthwhile, but all the data sets that they refer to are otherwise freely available, if you know where to find them. So they're coming from the federal, the 100 agencies I mentioned before.
So if you went to is it gov.us? I forget what it is. If you go to the major US government portal, and you can drill down to organizations and agencies, departments there. No?
You can to some extent. I never use that myself. I actually use Google. I do Google searching, and I find out first who cares. In other words, if I'm looking for the number of what they call passengers that have flown out of Denver, they call that enplanements. I would learn that through several Google searches. So I'd find that there's two federal agencies, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics and the Federal Aviation Administration. So I would then do site:/FAA.gov, enplanements Denver, or just enplanements general, because I wouldn't expect to find the specific data point. I would just try to find out who cares about enplanements. Or site:/BTS.gov and do the same thing. And you'll find that you get similar but different numbers from both agencies.
It's always fascinating to me that contextual word, the word that is used by the people who care, is the most important thing. It
is the most important thing. And so that's why you have to find out where in these 100 agencies, it used to be fedstats.gov used to do that. And that agency has gone belly up, not belly up, but they've sunsetted it. So you can't do that anymore. So you have to look at, every year the federal budget puts out a publication inside the federal budget called Statistical Programs of the United States. And this is where it delineates what federal agencies collect statistics. And that's where you get the 13 PSAs, primary statistical agencies. And then you get the other agencies that aren't primary statistical agencies from that publication, Primary Statistics of the United States. And so I deal in the book with how to get to those statistics.
This is great. And it's especially great because I think that this is a nice little intro to my students who may never take a government docs course. So this is great.
Well, government documents is one of those things. It's a deer in the headlights kind of topic. But if you're interested in government documents, and you'll have I'd like to think there's still jobs for those people, but as government information professionals like me retire, I'm not sure that we're being replaced by other people with all the background, but I could be wrong.
Well, that's all the more reason why generalists may need to know more about this. A sad reason, perhaps, but
exactly
a reason, yeah.
I think it's an exciting time, and people do get the impression that they can just go to Google or Bing or Yahoo and find everything they want, and they cannot. There's a lot of things, even though things in copyright might be searchable, although not readable in something like Google, that doesn't mean that you're finding everything. You're just finding perhaps a key to things. And I'd like to think that information professionals have created library guides to help get them to those other points. But we still need databases. We still need the value added stuff. We still need somebody that indexes trade publications. We still need indexes to newspapers. Of course, peer-reviewed content, books. We just need full text. So there's a tension between having full text access and having controlled vocabulary access to these things. And the answer is somewhere in the middle, or a little bit of both.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we need the vendors, and they're going to be getting our money. Not as much these years, because most libraries have to cut from their budget because of COVID. And but I'd like to think that vendors will continue. They're adding a value. They're certainly charging for it. And, certainly way too much in the case of, we need more open access things. But anyway, I don't know the future. Let me say that. I'm always surprised by it.
We're going to look for it in your new book.
That's right. Well, I get to tell you the truth. I love the Google book and I like the databases book, but it's really the government information where my passion really is. And I'm looking forward to doing an update on that in maybe 5 years or so, if I'm still around.
Thank you for this. I know my students are going to enjoy it. And we will keep in touch, and they will keep in touch through their readings of your work.
Well,
So
thank you.
thanks a million.
Thanks, students. Thank you.